at 7:32, having a quorum, I call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting, so we can only do what's on the agenda. So Bert, you had asked to say something that was related to, what was that you wanted to say?
I would never say something that is not on the agenda, but I want to thank you all for what you have done with the cafeteria extension. I was there last night. And thank you also for, remembering that FNB, Jack, had something to do with it. And that's it. I love this new high school cafeteria extension. I know it when my children went there. And now that's a few years later, I do remember that I went there 2 years ago with the League of Women Voters for a drive for sign up for the elections. So at that time, it felt like it was very loud. It was very uncomfortable. Kids didn't like it. And so I was not happy. And so it was a registration drive. And so now it's all changed. I also asked some of I'm with the Boy Scouts in Darien. So I asked some of the guys, what do you think? And, these are 9th graders, 10th graders, and they tell me the truth. The Boy Scouts. And they still think that sometimes some of the guys go in the computer room to have lunch, which they do. But overall, the student population really loves the new cafeteria extension. Thank you all. Okay? Thank you for offering me the opportunity outside of the agenda.
I said you can't say that, so sit down, because you couldn't say that. And that's how you get around the rules. All right. I had requested earlier that I get a copy of the resolution, so I could have emailed it. Unfortunately, we all received it in the mail instead of getting it from email. So this is Resolution 19-1, I believe, since it's the first thing of the year. And it is, thank you. It is for the appropriation of $355,000 to upgrade electrical panels at Hinley Homes and Royal Elementary Schools. Just a couple of quick things. Ox Ridge isn't included because there's going to be work on that. Tokenique as well as Darien High School already have central air, their newer buildings, so they're not included. We did have some questions that we forwarded to the Board of Ed, and Mike was kind enough to give us some additional information, which I forwarded late. I apologize, but they've had some hectic time over there to get it, but I have copies just in case anybody wants to see it. So I'm going to ask the Mike and Tara show to give a, pardon me, for having some discussion on the 3 panels. We also do have the cost to run and the cost for the equipment, which is not part of this, but since everybody keeps on asking for it, we'll have, and I'll explain the analysis, because Mike gave me information and then I did a little bit of manipulation. So, Tara, Mike.
So we are coming off cycle, as you know, the Board of Education is prayer to do. Stand up, I'm short, here. Is this better?
Oh, come join us.
Well, for a moment only. We are coming off cycle for an appropriation, which, you know, we try not to do. Last time we've done it was years ago for boilers. Dr. Landon joined us January 1st, right around the time that we were closing out last year's books, and he saw a need and found an economical way, we believed, to address this need. He came to the board in September with the idea. The board sent him and the team back and requested an engineering study so we could come up with the most accurate costs, knowing that we would come forward and wanted to do that diligently for all the groups' approval that we would need. I believe you all have copies of that engineering report. And so we are here. You know, there's been an express need for years. We've heard from parents concerning the environment in terms of the heat and kind of the climate that their students are learning in. We've looked at many solutions over the years, many of which proved economically unfeasible, and really, as much as we wanted to alleviate the problem, just weren't really realistic. So we thank Dr. Landon and the team for coming up with something that is realistic, we think, that is responsible and addresses the needs of children, which is always, you know, our two main factors that we're looking at. With that, I can throw technical questions to either Mr. Feeney or Mr. Lynch. We tried to answer all of your questions in advance, but are happy to field any that you might have or any that you feel need to be further discussed.
I do want to say, because this has been mentioned before, so all classrooms at the end of this process, all classrooms will have air conditioners. Some classrooms already have air conditioners, which is why the number of units are less than the total number of sections that we have in those 3 schools.
But above and beyond air conditioning, and Mr. Lynch can speak to this, we're really finding a problem. You know, they're older schools, circuit panels. Mr. Lynch gave an example last time we discussed this about some panels having only one circuit left to plug into. That's just not great capacity planning for the future. This is an off-cycle request because of the time in which we figured it out and our ability to ameliorate classroom environments, and we think it's reasonable. But, you know, air conditioning solves that problem, but also as we grow as a school in our capacity, we recognize we need more electrical at this point. Anything more technical is going to Mike on electrical.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Mike if you could refresh me. I think you talked about this the other night, and for some reason it's escaping me. But there's part of the request where we are going to rewire all of the existing air conditioning to have dedicated AC panels, right, in the buildings. If you could just talk about that and why that's a good idea or why that's necessary, because the cost to rewire some of those rooms was not inconsequential.
Stand up. So at the elementary schools, like Tara was saying, some of these panels, there's capacity to add breakers, but very few, or there's room to add breakers, but the amperage is maxed out, so you can't add any more. So the thought was that in each of the elementary schools, we split the building in half, and on, say, the west side and the east side, we found appropriate space where we could put a panel of correct capacity and wire all the new plugs into it. And then where there's existing plugs that are taking a panel to its limit, we'll rewire those. There will probably be a couple of classrooms on the east and west side of each building that will remain where they are. You know, we won't rewire those, but we'll rewire to give us a little more flexibility.
So, David, are you talking a little bit about...
I read the engineering report this afternoon, and it looked like there was a section on each of the 3 schools where they were going to rewire existing AC units so that I think the phrasing that's sticking in my head was all of the AC, there'd be like a dedicated panel for the AC components of each school, so that all of the AC would be rewired from the existing panel to the new panels.
Let's see, I interpreted that as these new panels are only going to be for air conditioning units.
Right, well, I think we're saying the same thing. When I read that, I thought that there was some reference to taking AC units that are in the existing rooms currently and rewiring those rooms to the new panels too.
There is, as needed and as the budget allows, yes. And
So just as needed, not definitely all of
I think
them.
part of where it is
Okay.
geographically in the building, where it
Okay.
makes most sense.
Yeah, I was just trying to sort of understand that because there's a cost, involved.
you know, like if I took room, say 101 down in,
Right,
there's a panel right there that's not at capacity.
Right.
That circuit goes to.
okay,
I'm not rewiring that.
all right,
That's a waste of money.
right.
But if I go over to the new wing of the building, those panels, those circuits will definitely go to the new panel.
But in terms of additional costs, and Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason we have air conditioners are there are students whose educational needs demand it. And so we actually do incur costs year over year now to rewire electrical because the air conditioners at
Oh, when
times
the
must
student,
move
when the
with the
student moves to
student.
a different room, you got to rewire it to that room anyway.
So overall, this project will kind of stop that haphazard, like, this student has now been
No,
placed in this.
that part I totally get. It
Yeah.
just, when I read the report, for some reason, I just had it in my head that they're gonna take things from the existing panel and move them to the new panel.
It's not like absolute every
Right.
single one.
Do it on a case-by-case basis.
And it will be most of them, but not all of them.
Okay.
I do want to say, though, that's, the amount may be not material for amounts we typically look at, but at least for these three schools, the mere fact that every summer, we're not rewiring rooms to follow kids or teachers is a saving or an expense that...
Yeah, no, that's a-
No, it's not,
that's a
I'm not
different
saying
issue.
that. I'm saying this in addition to that. This is a potential savings that has not been captured in any of these numbers, but I'm just saying is there.
Yep.
So, go ahead, Stacy.
You talked about how you're planning for the future with these electrical panels. These three schools in your master plan, you guys have, for your facilities, are considering doing additions. Does the electrical panels include those additions, or is that going to be a separate topic?
So, do you want to talk about that and maybe dovetail the portable conversation?
The portable buildings now, they will go offline.
Okay.
And that is more than enough electric right now to power up the additions
Okay.
of the size we're thinking, that are in the master plan, and the enrollment trends show are needed, and
To that, portables take an incredible amount of energy.
Yep.
they're electric heat pumps, they're electric air conditioning, inefficient electric lighting, they're not well insulated, so they use a lot of energy.
They're not great.
One of the questions that we had requested, and I sent out the chart, I just reworked it a little bit, but 3 types of air conditioners that are coming in, 2 frigid airs and 1 Friedrich. BTUs are 11,019 and 8, which relate to certain watts, running typically an 8-hour day, which, based upon the calculations, says that the cost per day to run this would be about $104. Then went on, because we asked what the potential annual cost was, and Mike handed out, we passed over earlier today, a calendar of what's run. Doesn't mean it's always going to be there. Pardon me. But if I go and do, let me use my glasses so I get this right. The incremental cost for running it 67 days a year, which was most probably the maximum that we would do, is less than $7,000. So that answers what the incremental annual cost would be if all of these units were running for 67 days. And, you know, that was based upon some calculation that Mike already has. No guarantee that they're going to be running for 67 days. They may be running for less. So that answered that. Also, if I'm not mistaken, the number of units are 46 units. The average cost is about 800 for the units based upon the budget
I think
average.
it's 32.
Yeah, thank you.
32 units at $800.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been staring at these numbers for a long time.
And so long, far too long. So, I think it's 32,000 that we're figuring that the total cost for the equipment is, which will be absorbed in the current year budget by them looking to see where there's some efficiencies that they can gain this year and reallocate those funds to the equipment purchase. So that handles that. Were there any other questions that were open, outstanding, that anyone wants answered? So I take it we're ready to vote, so I need somebody to move it. Stacy moved, I need a second. Second. Lisa, second. Quick. All right, all in favor? It's unanimous, so I'm not going who's against. Thank you very much for your presentation, the information that was provided, and your
We look
timely
forward to
response.
Monday at the full RTM. We appreciate your recommendation.
Yeah, we're going to be sort of sneaking in there because the Board of Selectmen are doing their budget, so we may be a little tight getting in.
Well,
So,
make
but-
sure your recommendation gets in. But thank you all very
Fortunately,
much.
we're second to report on this. I'm assuming that Clara's first.
I would think she is, but- All right, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, next on our agenda is the discussion of the superintendent's budget. This is still the superintendent's budget. You more than welcome to stay and hear our comments. All right, we're not talking about tubers this year.
It's like 23 cents per watt hour.
Yeah, I was happy that the piano wasn't raised. Last night, they started putting some numbers on the table and of potential modifications. There were a couple ups, there were a couple downs. And so those will be discussed at the next two meetings prior to their vote. I'm going to put you right on the spot, Stacy. Start with what you thought, and then we'll go.
Thought about,
What they put on there, some of the things, it should eventually be on their website, where all their documents are. You can also discuss any of the other information that came out on the school psychologist and some other things along those lines. But it should be on, if you go to the departments, the finance, and then to the current budget, and their cut sheet, as we always used to refer to it as, should be posted there shortly.
so I just kind of marked what they put on the list. I didn't mark the actual numbers because I was trying to keep up. But the superintendent is proposed, so when the curriculum supervisors, the department chairs, were first rolled out, part of what their job was to teach a class so that they stayed current on the material, they understood what their teachers were facing, they stayed connected with the students, yada, yada, yada. What Dr. Landon is proposing is to take that class away, which would mean an increase in an FTE, like a 0.2 FTE. So
But
they...
for 5.
0.5.
It ends up being more than a full FTE.
Right.
So the department chairs would be teaching?
They wouldn't be
without a-
teaching
Not
anymore.
teaching. Yes, that's
They would
correct.
only be department chairs.
That's
Right.
correct.
They would only be curriculum supervisors. So the Board of Ed, marked that, line item to discuss. They marked across the board, every single RC that has substitutes, they marked to discuss and try to, cut that back. The guidance counselor, they did not mark, so the guidance counselor is in the budget.
1 or 3?
One guidance counselor for the middle schools. So that is in the budget.
Although I do want to say, I thought that and I'm not against the guidance counselor, but I thought the presentation on the guidance counselor yesterday was very weak. And from what I'm hearing, the vision was originally, which was 2 guidance counselors per grade going to follow the students for the grade, which, contrary to what the school, what they have said, is a prelude to house that has not been decided by the Board of Ed yet. There was a lot of conversation about all these guidance counselors speaking to other guidance counselors and everything else like that, and I thought that was muddying the water. If you have 2 guidance counselors on a grade, the only 2 that they should be speaking to are each other. And because I'm assuming that we have qualified, trained guidance counselors that know what they're supposed to be doing. So, I thought that was very muddy in how it was explained.
I think that Mrs. Somers and her staff's presentation at the December 11th Board of Ed meeting was a strong presentation.
Yes.
So if you haven't watched that, I encourage you to watch that on Vimeo.
And don't watch last night's, watch the 11th.
I think last night was a follow-up, and sometimes that can be challenging because you don't know, do I reteach what I already taught?
But
Anyway.
you also thought it was a little muddy.
Yes, so,
Yeah, I don't
but,
want to stand alone. I mean, this is a conversation we had. We both thought it was a little muddy.
but the point is, the guidance counselor is in the budget, so at this point, it's not gonna be, at this point, we don't have line item veto, Board of Finance, it's in there. It won't be discussed by the Board of Ed again, because it's in there.
Stace,
Yes.
just going back so I understand the first point you mentioned about the department heads.
Yes.
They would no longer be teaching.
Yeah.
Now, what's the impact on the proposal for that?
0.5 FTE.
No, it's 1.5 because there's 5 department heads
For curriculums.
for
Yep.
curriculum.
And 2 for
And so
special
if
ed.
it's 2.2 approximately, it's a little over 1 FTE that would be added back.
That would be added back, okay.
Now, one of the board members said, how about they continue teaching? And had a rough number to add back to the budget.
67?
Yeah, I believe it was 67,000. That was one of the dockets that Feeney had available last night.
So they're
Which is
considering-
up online now.
So, Dr. Landon is proposing that they should no longer teach, which means you have to find teachers for those classes. So that would be an additional $67,000 to the budget. And Dennis, I believe, was the board member who
Yeah, I'm not
flagged this.
mentioning who
Sorry,
did it.
okay. A board member flagged it to discuss at their next couple meetings. I think,
I think it's a valid point. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, Dr. Brenner had a vision.
yep,
We do have an interim in here now, and, you know, unless they found that it's absolutely not working,
Yep.
which could very well be the case, and then modifying it is not a problem, but before we shut it down, I personally would feel a little bit more confident that the next person who comes in might have that final say on that.
there just hasn't been that much discussion at the board level about this budget initiative. There hasn't been much about data about, you know, we've only had these department chairs for 2-3 years now. This is their 3rd year. So, you know, it'd be nice to see some data on why the change. I just don't think there's been a lot of discussion at the Board of Ed.
Are they teaching at Fitch this year, like they did last year?
No, they're teaching
Just
kind of.
regular classes?
Yeah. So,
we also
Well, you know,
They fix-
there's more flexibility in that because, you know, these guys were, I think, originally 20% department chair and 80% teaching, and now it went to the other way around, 80% department chair and 20% teaching. Now it's proposed that it's 100% department chair, no teaching. But maybe in the next administration, it could be 80% teaching, 20%.
No, we're not going back there. Unless they kill department chairs, we're not going back.
Okay, so, but there's some flexibility, I think, okay? It does provide some comfort that the new superintendent of schools doesn't say what my predecessor did is all crap. As often in business, people come in, they say what the guy before me did is all crap. He doesn't say that. He says, it seems to be working, I'm for it. And we said last year, it may or may not work here. Okay? I actually didn't think it's a great idea because it creates a matrix reporting structure where the math teacher doesn't know if he's in Hindley, doesn't know if she's reporting to the Hindley principal or the chair of the math department. So if it's working right now, okay, I'm less troubled now than I was last year.
That part is working, and for those of you who recall, I was very much in favor. I'm not in favor of a peer telling another peer, suggesting what they should do on curriculum and not having our curriculum followed, which was the case. I was not in favor of us trying to roll out a one-to-one technology tool and having some teachers decide they weren't going to use it. So I'm not in favor of people deciding whether or not new or old that they were going to do their own thing. If we want, and not only that, it was important that the curriculum between the middle school going into the high school was consistent on what its approach was going to be. Not that there was a disconnect, which was happening in certain classes, which was creating angst and difficulty for certain students. So for all those reasons, I was in favor of it. I don't mind Matrix. I've worked on Matrix for most of my professional career, and I think our teachers are intelligent enough to handle it. They understood what was the school side, but they also were now able to go and work. As for the teaching was a unique thing because one year they were supposed to teach in Middlesex, the next year at the high school level. I'm just a little bit uncomfortable because, as Stacy said, there hasn't been a lot of discussion on the success factors, why they're not doing it, and being in an interim situation, I'm not for making certain changes of going backwards. I mean, I'm for continuing to roll things out where we have to progress, but rolling something back, once it's rolled back, we'll never get them teaching again, and maybe that's the way it should have been.
Yeah, other than this, the department chairs came back to the board in September or October to present on how their progress is going of their new role. But other than that, we haven't really gotten a lot of data and feedback on how this initiative has been working out.
I recognize you. Go ahead.
Who's recommended the change?
The superintendent, Dr. Landon.
Okay, so you have to, I guess, take the credibility of the fact that he ran a very good school system for many decades, and he's had some experience.
And he was also told in that town that he was spending too much money and they capped the school system. I don't know if you're aware of that. They capped it at 2% on him. He also had special ed hidden throughout his whole district because I did a special ed study. And so his special ed courses weren't necessarily the same as our special ed because he had some here, and some there. So yes, he ran a good school district, but you can't come in and make Darien Westport.
He wasn't asking that.
Well, some of the things that he has proposed is how he did it at Westport.
I'm only talking about what's on the agenda that she's mentioning, which is really the dropping of the teaching.
I don't know that he had department chairs there. I'm just saying.
Fair question. Fair question.
I don't know if you
Did
had
he?
them there.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I
That's a
didn't,
fair question.
I don't
Well, it
follow
seemed
it.
like the strongest reason to add these positions in the first place was to, like we said in our presentation, synchronize the curriculum, right? And line it all up, and it seemed like all that heavy lifting needed to be done in the first year or two. So now, I think you brought up the good point, like, won't they have possibly more time or more freedom to teach versus less going forward? I mean, it's a question I'd like to ask anyway.
So let's move on to the other ones.
So, okay, so we did,
Because we don't know, and we may find out that they're not cutting it, it was just put on the table. Remember, these are things that are put on the table.
Yes.
They haven't discussed them, all right? So, we can have some
Yeah.
input and
Yep.
say whether I'm in favor, but I
Yep.
don't want to delve on it because it may not happen.
yep, so that's the high school, nothing on Fitch Academy, Middlesex, the substitute teachers, as I said, across the board. Guidance counselor is in for Middlesex.
Wait, substitute teachers being cut?
Yeah.
Back
they-
to the level that they were in the prior
Yes.
year, and 3 schools specifically
Yes.
were told, manage your
Yes.
attendance of your teachers better.
And remember, the curriculum coordinators or the department chairs are for high school and middle school. So that's also in the Middlesex,
Yeah, but Feeney will go and do the allocation.
Yep, but I was just for the record. And then elementary schools across the board, again, substitutes. And then for the psychologist, a board member motioned to cut or maybe just do 2 psychologists
2 additional ones.
versus the 4.
All right, let's take a step back again. The concept is that each of the schools will have 2 psychologists. There are 6 FTEs already in place. 1 was a floater. So that position would be assigned to one of the 5 schools. So that's why it was an increment of 4 school psychologists. So what was proposed, which is, any of these things can be modified or voted on, was instead of doing all schools having 2, that all the schools would have at least 1, and there would be 3 additional ones there instead of 4, 5.
So you'd have 3 floaters,
You
basically.
have basically 3 floaters in theory. But it was just, so that allows the discussion of the school psychologists to occur, what was going on. I do want to touch on this, because it's something that I've been saying for some time. I've been very vocal that I do not like their accounting for school psychologists. And I do believe it's a knee-jerk reaction to John Zagroski's speak on special ed. The reason I say that is, number 1, school psychologists are doing the exact same thing in the social emotional in Middlesex and at the high school, but there was no allocation to those 2 schools. So it's because there's 4 incremental, I'm going to hide them over there. Also, as we discussed at our last meeting, it's been known for many of us that have worked around the Board of Ed for some time, that there's a lot of 504 students, and there's crises that social workers, special ed, school psychologists, anybody, all hands on deck when a child has a crisis to go, that's been occurring for years. And those courses are in RC 24. RC 24 courses do not constitute solely special ed expenditures. And so what I've been asking, going back to when Robin Pavia was running it, is that there be a footnote of what the non-special ed courses that are embedded in RC 24. Rough estimate, footnoted, don't care. But that goes back to some of the analysis that they just gave. because they sort of merged the 504 and the special ed students on the analysis that Sheila gave on what they're spending time that came to be about 41.6 hours. But I wasn't sure because some of the school psychologists also do SRBI that is not 504 students, and that wasn't included in it. In conversations, I tend to believe that there's probably a lot of additional special ed work or even 504 work that they're just not reporting. Our school psychologists are probably at least at 48 hours in a 6-day period, which, being that they're supposed to be working 36, is a concerning number. So maybe they're rushing through some things because they got so much to do, and if they had ample time, they might be able to do some things better.
So, Jack, I'm with you.
Wait, Deb asked,
Okay.
I just want to go. Deb asked a very good, Deborah G. asked a very good question. And her math was a little bit off, but it was a very good question. And that is, if you have 2 school psychologists and they're going to be sharing the workload that's there, and I'm estimating based upon what they didn't tell us there, because this was a slice in time and, you know, triannuals can be rather time-consuming, I know from my own children. I figured that they're working at least 48 hours a week now. So that says 24 for each of them just on their existing workload, which then gives them approximately, since they're supposed to be working a 36-hour, 6-day period, and the way I came out to like 48 is approximately, I guarantee they're working 8 hours a day. You know, so over 6 days they're working, whether or not it's at home or there. So that gives them approximately another 12 hours each to either run programs or do other things. Again, I personally am in favor of the school psychologist. I did not like Superintendent Landon's response on something, an answer to a question. And that is, I am for early intervention. And so if you can capture a problem that's situational, that doesn't allow something to fester and grow, that's great for any child. Not for any person, let alone it's also good for a child. However, if there's a recurring problem, that child is either going to get a 504 or there's going to be a PPT and that child's going to be going into special ed if it's a recurring situation that's affecting the education. So again, catching something early still means the services that have to be rendered and other things and the skills that you can work with a student, the sooner you can do it, the better for the student. What I didn't like is that the Superintendent Landon was indicating that this was all general ed students. And my response is no. It's part of the reason why other health impaired was set up as a category, and a low-cost one for that. So I do believe that some of these, that they're just going to pick up additional special ed. I don't think that they're going to have 36 hours full-time on just the 504s and the general, but all the other 504 expenses are in RC24. They're not allocated out to each of the schools. So that's an inconsistent accounting policy. So it's much better to put it in special ed and then explain what's in RC24 by, again, we used to have in prior documents how many 504 students there were. It's no longer in the budget. And then just do a quantification of what you're spending on that. It could be $500, $1 million. And I think that's sufficient to do. When Clara was here and some of the rest of us have been doing this for a while, Barry, you know from when you were a board member, special ed course did not just go for special ed students. There was some general population expenses in there as well. Right?
You mean special ed features for students in the general population.
Yeah. There were services that were
Sure.
provided. Yeah.
Sure.
We just knew that it was all in one place.
It wasn't just for people who were designated as
Special ed.
special.
Yeah, yeah.
So in reality, Jack, so a psychiatrist or psychologist spends some time on a child. You don't know if this child is going to end up in special ed or not at that point. So your accounting is going to be very difficult because, yeah, that child may be already in special ed, maybe not. If it's not, it's a different case. I understand that there should be strong accounting guidelines, because if you go to the doctor, the psychologist, or your lawyer, and they keep hours. They have the clock is running. You don't see it sometimes, but under his desk, he has a little clock, and when you're 50 minutes up, you're done. And so there should be strong accounting that we know what's happening where. I see that. But as far as tracing it back to the individual student and his background, that's going to be difficult.
I don't think it's as difficult as what you think, number one, because they have to do it already for IEPs.
So, and the other question that I have...
But my thing isn't necessarily on the tracking. Mine is, it's inconsistent with how Darien has handled these type of expenses for years. This is how they handled it in Westport. It is not how we handle it here. And so it's a Westport recommendation, and it followed on the heels of John's State of the Town, where they did not want to add more to special ed. It's an incorrect accounting for it. And that's it. All in favor of it, of this school psychologist. I just want it to be accounted consistent with how we've been accounting things. But I do want them to go the extra step and say, and explain that this isn't, RC24 isn't all for special ed students. That can be easily put into the budget.
So Taylor sent something out this week to me that was very persuasive about psychologists, and I'm sensitive to these. There's a change in the students' background and needs, I think, over what happened 10 years or 20 years ago in my generation. So I'm sensitive to that. I just don't want to have a situation where, there's this old story about a town that had one lawyer and nothing going on in the town. Then another lawyer moved to town and the business was booming. So if we have two psychologists, maybe, they talk to each other and they have conferences and all kinds of things are going on. Then they call the parents psychologist, and so it gets, out of hand because everyone means well. When you mean well, sometimes you forget how much it costs. That is my concern.
It's funny that you use that analysis, because I said that, if everybody's going to meet with all the kids, sometimes you're kicking a sleeping dog, so to say, and all of a sudden somebody says, oh, well, maybe I should have a problem. Not that they will, but I mean, it's the same thing. I want the children that need it to have full services. It is also part of the reason why I keep on talking about other health impaired, except the problem is an exit strategy. If a child is going through a crisis, I don't want them just to have a school psychologist. I want them to get social work. I want to get every resource that they can for that child so that they're embraced, not just with the school psychologist who's already busy. And having them in other health impaired does provide those services for them. That's my thing.
Just to build on, excuse me, no, go ahead, Taylor. Just to build on Bert's remarks, so I watched the video of the January 15th meeting, the one that we were at the other meeting that night last Wednesday, and I had some observations and a specific question going to maybe the softer points about how education has changed, certainly from when we went to school. And I certainly remember that when our children were going through school here and first went to kindergarten, I was, impressed by struck by how much kindergarten had changed, certainly from when I went to kindergarten. And I imagine that, and I know that is in fact the case, continued to change the kindergarten curriculum. And as I understand it, certainly back when I thought of my kids going through kindergarten and now, is that much of kindergarten, the curriculum has changed from maybe socializing younger kids, playtime, organized playtime, to now more academic, reading, writing, getting them ready for first grade.
Yep.
So with that observation, the question I have is, are there any studies out there saying that when kindergarten programs went from more socialization to less socialization to more academic rigor, that maybe on the back end, we're starting to see socialization issues more in the primary schools, the grades. So it's more of a question about how much of these needs we see here are also maybe affected by things within our control, maybe changes we made to go from a more socialized play date type of, playtime, getting the kids to socialize, to more getting them ready for college.
Are we missing that step?
Excuse me?
Are we missing the socialization?
Yes. Well, we're giving up the socialization in the early stages, now we're having to address them on the back end.
I think one of the changes, and I don't really want to get into the educational aspects of it, because that's really not our role.
Well, I'm just asking if there are any studies, that's all.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are, but one of the things that always struck me, and it was really when we were talking about places like Darien versus Bridgeport in their educational system, and the need for preschool. All right? One of the big things were, when I went to kindergarten, back when they were still using an abacus, there were no preschools. I mean, and my mom worked, and there really weren't preschools. My kids went to preschools, and now, I'm not sure they're not doing college level work in preschools. So, but one of the differences are, and I'm not sure if I'm using the right number, I'm sure I'm going to be wrong, but they said that if the difference between somebody who went to preschool and somebody who didn't, there's an addition of, and I may be wrong, so I apologize, you can look it up and Google me later, but it's something outrageous, like somebody went to preschool may have as much as 5,000 to 10,000 words greater vocabulary.
It's even more than that, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, I wanted to say something like 20,000, it was like some outrageous number in their vocabulary versus somebody who didn't. And it was, I was actually bringing on because I do believe in universal preschool.
I just wanted to comment on Bert's lawyer story, which is funny, but I don't think necessarily relevant here, just given the presentation that was made about what they do in their off time when they aren't working with students, they're coaching teachers. And I've seen the benefit of that now, putting my fourth into the, program, watching teachers try new methods with my own kids and connecting with them finally. And if they have someone helping them when they have the time, that's great for all our kids. Like, it's going to enable them to learn better, faster, and survive the academic rigor that we're forcing on them.
And all that has, there have been discussions at the board and even amongst our own group. The children who are outplaced now, they're outplaced, they're not coming back. But Brenna was very correct by saying if we build certain things that work here, we might defer future children from being outplaced. And there's no way to ever measure that because the mix of children changes from year to year. But it's things that you just mentioned, Taylor, that potentially helps a student earlier in their educational cycle, which then means down the road, the great thing of not using the discrepancy model anymore, down the road means that the cost to service that child is less, and the child is more successful, which is more important than what the costs are. So, that's part of the reason I'm
In Krista's defense.
about that.
yes.
Well, and Krista brought that up and said, is this sort of like a long-term, low-level early intervention kind of a strategy to reduce outplacements, and they flat out said no, but I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a good argument for that.
Yeah, and I've had long conversations with my daughter who's, as I said, is a licensed clinical social worker. We were talking about it, and actually Dr. Landon's daughter is a licensed clinical psychologist, so we were talking about charging and other things like that. But, and my daughter periodically works with schools, and they said that if you get these kids earlier, it's better for the child. So, and there is more stress on them than I think what we did. I mean, even if you consider, none of us thought of anything about walking to school or taking up bicycles or doing all this other stuff, and kids don't do that now. I mean, unless you're in homes, but, because everybody walks.
Okay, so back to the financial guys. Every decision has three elements, basically. One is compassion, one is strategy, and one is money. If you ask me, in terms of compassion and strategy and money, the school psychologists beat the department chairs by a mile. By a mile. There's no question. But we're not in a position where we micromanage and say, okay, Board of Education, come back, get rid of these department chairs that we don't terribly believe in, and you get your psychologists. That's not how the system works, I guess. I'm not part of the system. In business, that actually might.
But actually, that's good. I'm going to go through some of the other numbers.
Okay.
They made a recommendation to increase the excess cost reimbursement by 100 or 150,000, which is really interesting if you look at the real numbers of what they got. They're still far under what that should be. There was a $10,000 cut in mail across all the schools.
Mail?
Mail. Because they're still sending things first class, which is just ludicrous. Even though it's a school first class, if they did pre-sorted, they'd be done. They're sending everything to Darien. It should all be pre-sorted and they get
Like the parents?
Yeah. There's some things that still are sent as opposed to going by email. There were a lot of discussion on sports. One of the things is buying helmets for all of the girls lacrosse teams, that's a new thing. There's 69 kids. I will tell you my response that I said privately to them, having been the parent of a captain of a state championship and FCAC championship game, 69 kids on the lacrosse teams is ludicrous based upon the fact that if you're not on JV and moved up at the end of your freshman year, your chances of playing in varsity on that lacrosse team is not very high. So having 30 kids on freshmen, I said this when they were looking for 2 coaches, it would be fairer to the kids to say, find something else to do.
Just so this committee understands, this was a proposal by a board member who wants to be proactive. The helmets are not mandated yet.
Are other schools using them?
Not yet.
We would be the
They are?
first?
Sorry.
Yeah, they are, but I will also tell you that being that they are mandated, it could vary, having children that have played Premier, kids are already having the helmets in 7th and 8th grade. And similar to what happens in baseball, is that we buy helmets and kids have their own. So you're gonna buy the helmet that you feel comfortable with that's compliant. So, but I'm not against buying it, I'm just against buying it for 69 kids, because I don't think there should be 69 kids in the program.
Then there was a cut to half of swim and dive, because that's the only sports that the parents are not sharing costs in. And
Well,
then,
it is a sport that they're not. I can name others that
Okay.
they're not sharing courses.
and then there was another proposal to add to the budget to even out, to make it that every sport, parents pay 50% and the Board of Ed pays 50%.
And those were girls hockey, boys hockey, and skiing. The amount was approximately $24,000. And the concept is that there were some agreements on that, but the board member proposed that at a minimum, the school should be paying 50% of a varsity sanctioned sport. So, and if a sport, the school's already paying 60% for a sport, there was no modification to that to bring it down to 50. It was just, if it's a varsity sanctioned sport, that the school district should pay at least 50% of these costs for outside usage.
And then skipping ahead to technology, a board member asked, our director of instruction of technology has not been here this year, and the district has been using other staff, consultants, whatever, so a board member asked, do we need to replace this role? So that'll be a discussion at the next
Yes, and
couple
that's about
meetings.
$172,000. There was also discussion on budget control. And on the budget control, I think it got a little muddy there, but from listening to what the initial recommendation was, is that budget control is basically for salaries that should a grade end up with 1 or 2 students more, we have to have a new section, hence about 65,000 or 67,000, whatever they're using now, to have that teacher. And it's one of the reasons why I say the number of students is a meaningless number, because we could have a drop of 15 students, but in some of the elementary schools have 20 students come in, so we really had a drop of 35, but we had 20 come in, and we got 6 new sections for $370,000 of teachers. So total students are sort of meaningless. I also say that total cost per student is another meaningless number, because when you compare it across our DERG, which I've done, you go to Weston, they have 3 schools. So how their facilities are going to be less than ours, the number of administrators will be less than ours, and so what the composition of that is more important than the total number, to me, just.
And then legal was flagged as well last night.
Yep. And there was a couple cuts to a couple of courses. There's, I believe, a new guitar course that's coming on, and...
There wasn't a cut.
No, I think it was put on the table.
That was separate from the budget discussion. That wasn't.
No, I think it's in this budget. Those were courses that they were talking about for next year.
Sorry, let me go to the curriculum budget. I thought she said it was already included in her budget.
Yes.
I don't have anything flagged for curriculum.
All right. I thought that they had made, in speaking, I thought somebody was talking about that. But anyway.
Did anybody use
Stacy,
the
we
word good idea?
said legal was flagged going up or down?
Jack? Sorry. Legal was flagged because in the administration RC, because that's where our FOIA has been, and they discussed looking at hiring possibly in-house counsel versus to help with some of this stuff.
So flagged for further review?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
They also had discussed about turnover.
Yeah, turnover, that was my next one.
Because that's one of the places where, you have more senior teachers leave. And by the way, that's the one thing that I totally disagree with you on the curriculum supervisors. Because I think we've had some people who weren't following what the administration want leave. And so that was the unstated aspect of those supervisors, that nobody could come and say, I'm getting rid of some senior people who don't want to play the way we want them to teach anymore. And there has been turnover there, and they've been younger or less experienced people who are more attuned to what's going on have been hired. Not that there's a crisis, but people have decided to leave because they didn't like it. They were forced out. And so the savings there more than paid for the curriculum supervisors. And also having better education, which is the primary goal that it was put in. But anyway, so that's it. Oh,
And
they
that was
also
just early learning program was
increased fee 4%.
to look into increasing the tuition.
So, I mean, we didn't
And then
get all of
capital.
them, but we don't need to because it's going to be out on the list. We'll hear what they have to say. They also put Checkpoint Charlie on the cutting back. They also...
The ventilation.
They also are looking to just have the study for the ventilation, which is, there was some additional confusion of what needs to go on there, but they will come back, and so I don't want to talk about it.
Yep.
But the ventilation is done. So that's basically it. My concern is they didn't put a lot on the table.
What was the total?
Did they talk about
Didn't care.
soliciting the
I don't care.
community for a new piano?
It's meaningless
That's
to
Bert's idea.
add up the total dollar amount, because a lot of things are just thrown out there to discuss. I mean, we will remember that last year, somebody said cut all sports, or something along those lines. So you don't, it's not the dollar amount, it's which ones that really are gonna make an impact that you worry about. $5,000 here and there takes a whole lot to move the needle. But it is a conversation that I had with Casey earlier, and it's one of the ones that, you know, when we talk about flexibility.
I mean, I'm not where, like Jack last time said, well, we can get it down 15 basis points this way or the other. I'm not, you know, micromanaging the 15 basis points. We see where we are. I actually think that F&B is ahead of the two boards that are looking at it right now. I think we're pretty solid on what we know.
Yep.
And have good feelings about it. We don't agree on everything, but I think we're in good shape to look at everything. Our powers are limited somehow.
But
We're the
not
last
dollar
ones-
amount.
We're the last ones to,
But we
rule.
have, that's not true.
Okay,
Because we have input into the Board of Finance before the Board of Finance does
Okay.
everything. So, I mean, that's part of the buddy system. We just operate the buddy system slightly differently with the Board of Finance. So the Board of, if there is concerns by this committee, the Board of Finance will know about it before they vote. Because if they find out about it afterwards, we have failed as a committee. So here's my thing, and I'm sorry for cutting you off. They were given guidance of 3%, and they came in at 2.89.
2.98.
998 rather. You're right,
Well,
sorry.
that's-
Which is,
you know, 11 basis points.
No, which is basically saying, how close to 3% can I get?
I disagree. I think the budget.
Just time, let me finish. Last year, Brenner, as a superintendent, if he was adding 4 bodies, would have figured out where he had other places to cut. We're not seeing that here this year, all right? And so where we talked about flexibility and excess costs and other things like that, in the past, that might have been there, but this year I have not seen the board exercise that discretion that we had under Brenner. And that is a concern. And so they were down at 2.5. And you also have to think that, you know, there's a matter of magnitude here. The Board of Selectmen would need to increase their budget by 12% to equal the same dollar amount. And so they have to be more cautious because they're sitting with a $100 million budget of what's going on. You want to add 4 bodies, fine. There has to be other places in this budget where you can make some modifications.
So if a top-down of 3% was set by the Board of Finance, has anybody talked to you, Jack? Certainly not to me, what the taxpayer's position would be, or how the feeling goes. You know, we're pretty much with the RTM, we are in touch with the taxpayer. That 3% might be a high number considering that the union increases, union-driven increases are 2.25%.
Yep.
Somebody may have said 2.25% is good enough for everything. Actually, somebody may have said, you know, we can't do anything about the 2.25%, but we can do something about the rest. So let's get it to 2% for the rest. And so we come out with 2.1 or 2.2. I do not know how we ended up with close to 3%. And apparently, what I hear now, we're not moving away from that at all.
Well, I think there is opportunities. Got to remember, last year, they received $3.4 million in excess cost reimbursement. And they budgeted about 2.6, 2.7. So there's some flexibility there. And as I said, when I do the calculation of this, and I give so much for incremental costs, the fact is the expenses are about the same, if not more. So if we're contributing in the same expenses, even at 70% as opposed to the 72% that we got, there's, you know, that's 100,000. If I take away some other costs, I can keep on going down, but I still have a $400,000 to $500,000 gap that I understand. I don't really want to play with because they don't know those numbers until later, which gives them less time to manage. But, you know, you want to add 4 bodies, you got to start looking for where else you're going to save. Brenna came up with the print shop. There's other things that are going on. There was a lot of questions going on about meetings, and I think everybody was confusing the meetings. Stacy and I were talking about this. There's 3 types of meetings. There's PPT meetings where you're meeting with what's going on. There's team meetings where you're meeting with those people associated with the IEP to make sure that's going on. That's the second type of meeting. But there's a third meeting, which is just, especially if you get to middle school or other things, you have grade level meetings and other meetings where school psychologists and others show up to, especially when you get into Middlesex and that, where you have the different colored teams. So they seem to only want to focus on the special ed, but there were all these meetings and what the efficiency is. There's something that I've mentioned for the last 4 years. One of the biggest complaints that happen with IEPs are students have accommodation that they're supposed to get a PowerPoint presentation or have a syllabus of what's going to be taught in the course. And I said, I think that's a great idea. All of our Middlesex and high school teachers already have their own website. It should be up for every student. It should be mandatory. It basically takes a big issue out of the IEPs that you spend time talking about. It takes away the violation that people are doing, and it's good for everyone. And by the way, when you go to college, you're going to get it anyhow, so why not give it to the students now so they start learning what it is? And that's just, when they talk about looking at efficiencies, that's one just staring them in the face that somehow special ed and curriculum aren't talking and saying, this is what we need to do. So there's simple things that I don't think they've done to effectuate some savings for themselves.
I wanted to go back to the point about the state of the town, and then they came in at 3%. Majority of this budget is done before the state of the town is given. Because the Board of Ed gets their budget books before the Christmas break, which is a week after the state of the town. So So I disagree with your comment of saying that he said 3%, so he came as close as he could. I disagree with you.
I think they had that information before the state was down.
Well, I don't know.
Just trust me on that.
I don't remember what my other points were.
The health insurance was a big part of this. I mean, we can't leave that out. Like,
That we'll see an estimate come, typically in March, we end up with whether or not that can be adjusted, but that'll be worth 10 or 15 basis points. I mean, they had, to move it down, one of the ways, I mean, it's $100,000 to move, 10 basis points approximately on this budget? So that's why I'm saying the $10,000 items, really, if they're not looking at big stuff, they're not moving the needle. It takes a lot of little stuff.
I brought this up at the last meeting. We talked about efficiencies. Efficiencies deal with operations. And the operational, increase in the operational, I think it was only 0.55%. I think that's pretty good.
I agree.
So I'm not focused, I'm not hung up on the 3%, 2.98, as much as maybe you might be or some other people might be. I think that's a good number. I think it shows a lot of good faith in trying to keep cost down.
So then you have to get a little more responsible in how you're recording excess cost reimbursement.
I remember what I was going to say now. On excess cost reimbursement, they are starting to flag that it's not going to be a place that we can go continuing going forward, because a lot of the students that we use to calculate that are going to be graduating out.
Don't go there.
That's what they said.
I know, and the response to that, which they know, is they anticipate we put in about $5 million worth of expenses, because you can back that out by doing what we got, and then dividing it by 72%. So that we put in over $5 million, and then you have to figure out there was $90,000 for each of the students that they did. So they've been saying that next year, not this budget year, but the next budget cycle, there will be about $1 million less submitted. That's great. That also means that the budget should be $1 million less for those students. So, and if we're getting 70% about that, the excess cost is coming down by $700,000, all right? But there should still be, for those students, a $300,000 net savings in their budget. So instead of 26 million, it would be 25 million. Instead of 3.4, they'll get 2.7. Now, that doesn't mean that those numbers will be there, because there are other students coming in that may have needs.
Right.
But if we're just tracking that $1 million, if those students have high needs, then they'll be replacing that $1 million there. So I'm not looking to say that this is the well we're going to.
Right.
Because there are savings that will be reflected in this budget if what they're saying is accurate. And that doesn't give a reason or cause to say that they should change excess cost the well, but they still have $700,000 that they had last year.
I know not much about excess cost or excess cost reimbursements. I know a bit about budgeting. This much I know as far as excess cost and excess cost reimbursement are concerned. These are the most uncertain items in the budget. They're uncertain.
I disagree. They have been very consistent over the last years, and there is nothing going on that, regardless of what
In
people
Hartford?
say,
Okay.
Hartford will not go there, and I am telling you, I have spoken to legal scholars, it is such a federal lawsuit that they will lose quicker than they can think, because it is the law, it's a federal law, not a state law, and they cannot say that Darien children are different than any other child because they're supposed to be treated equally. If Darien chooses to spend more, that was our decision in the district. So they can't not pay us when they're getting federal funds to be a safety net and do that methodology. So it is a federal lawsuit. It's not one of these state legislators, and my daughter will hate me for saying this, that state judges are different than federal judges, but it's going into the federal courts, and they weren't elected by a Democratic legislature, and they're going to get hammered.
Okay, Jack, so I will not contradict you. I just, if you're right, I will never say another word on it. If you're wrong, of course, I will bring it back.
You can, and I'm more than willing.
Okay, let's
Play the tape.
But let's just look at 20 towns, let's just look at 20 towns that have approximately $1 million of what's going on. And if these 20 towns get together and each of them just spends $500,000, which is less than what they're losing, it's a $10 million legal fund. And that buys people like Justice Roberts when he was practicing in the DC court. So you can imagine the civil rights attorneys that you can
But
buy
we're
for
living
that
with a
amount of
system that
money.
already discriminates. Yeah.
I understand what your position is. This would be an outright violation.
Well, what's the solution to that? I mean, I look at this as being a planning issue, and that number doesn't come out during our budget season, so that can,
Until they feel that they're backstopped by Board of Finance.
Well, what
Then
we're saying-
they feel like they need that cushion.
I don't have a problem with that.
But the Board
What
of
Jack
Finance
is
has
saying,
said
it's
that
very
they would
easy.
cover it.
Sorry, it's very easy to change the 3% or 2.98% down to something much less if you change the assumption on the excess cost of the cost or the excess cost reimbursement on the reimbursement. So that's a thing that I don't like to play with, that's all, because that's what I'm saying, it's big.
But I
And I think
also
if
don't like, go
If it
ahead.
changes dramatically, I don't think they're covered, even if they underestimate it by what they're estimating now. I mean, they're not, well, I mean, if something dramatic happens and legislation changes, I mean, the proposal by Governor Malloy, and the last time they talked about this, was for Darien to receive $100,000.
Yeah, I don't believe he's there.
We're not
anymore.
covered, like, we're
Right.
gonna need help.
And number one, I don't believe he's there anymore, all right? That's number one. And Ned hasn't said that that's where he's focusing on, all
Well, the
right?
co-op situation, what our
And wait, time out.
allocation is on
And
that.
the Board of Ed should be budgeting for what they know now. And what they know now is that this is the process for which they are reimbursed for, all right? And the Board of Finance has been very specific that should this go away, or should we get pension plans in here, most probably a supplemental tax would be issued so taxpayers know what happened in Hartford and why it occurred, and we have more than ample funds in our general fund to cover it, and then the next year we can budget for $100,000. But currently, what could have been, should have been, or other things like that, I could say that, in anticipation, we're going to have 300 kids in the LP. Why don't we record the income for that? It's just, this is what the current situation is. This is what they should be budgeting on. I understand there's some risk if they get 2% less, where it's at the tail of the year, so they need some flexibility on that. But year after year, coming in with $700,000-800,000 sitting in there, it says that they have more than enough room. And in fact, while we don't disagree with what they're spending it on, because they've been using it for capital security projects and other things like that, the fact of the matter is it's not supposed to be there like that much. Period.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, it goes back to
What's the total?
what's the right number for the cushion?
Taylor,
Is it
what's the total that they chipped back to the general fund?
Last year?
The district, yes, at the end of the 2018-19,
17, 18. I think it was.
17, 18.
720 something?
Yeah,
How much?
they gave 720.
724.
720 and change.
But they-
720,000.
But they had over...
Not on this item, what's the total?
No, that was everything.
Everything.
That's not how much
That included
extra
that
they
item. So
had,
it was
that's what
mostly
came
that
back.
item.
Yes, they had over $1 million that they received in excess of $1 million of what was budgeted.
So it's over $1 million.
Yeah, they had $1 million of flexibility in that. They used some of that for security. They used some of that for doing some curriculum. I mean, that was the analysis that Taylor did that we handed out. So there were some things there. Now, I don't like calling it cushion. It's not cushion. It's flexibility because you don't know what's coming in and that. And the other way I look at it is, you have in the Board of Selectmen budget, you have $400,000 in Board of Finance contingency that sits there. So if you multiply it out, that's about 1.6 they should have. But since they already have that in budget control and other things like that, you get it down to about $1 million is reasonable. It's 1% on a $1 million budget. That's a reasonable amount. Above that means we're taxing our taxpayers. And if there's capital projects for security, I see no reason why the Board of Ed shouldn't be going to the Board of Finance off-cycle and say, we came across with this security executive session, because they can't say everything of what goes on, have their conversation and vote on it, as opposed to spending it. So I'm not telling you what the numbers should be, because I'm not micromanaging them, but I'm saying that
Well,
if
so
they
you're
wanted
saying-
to get it down, there was places they could.
So the methodology derives from the facts, right? And if the fact is every year they're shipping back some funds, maybe there's a tendency that is well known in business that you budget a little higher because you don't want to get caught. So then you could tighten things a little bit and expect that maybe less money is coming back. There is one account I was really surprised to find in the school budget that says reserve in case the reserves are not sufficient, something like this, okay? I send it to Taylor. And that really is just, this is just backing it. You're really building your wall around you so that you could say, we have a lower headline number because we know we don't want to ship any money back and we don't need any cushion. That doesn't change any of the facts, of course. Okay, that's just an accounting issue. That doesn't mean any of these numbers and these raises and these expenses are not going through. But maybe the headline number can be a little lower, which has some impact also on what's going to happen next year.
I believe that there are members of the board that are looking, that are not necessarily happy with a effective 3% rate. And I think that there's some changes that will occur when they do that conversation. I'm just saying that, I'm not happy if it stays at 3%. I think that they could do better, and without taking away from education.
It seems like they could-
Supporting the addition of a guidance counselor and 3 and 4 school psychologists, so that's 5 FTEs. The 3 that they claim are giving back are only temporary, because there's as many as 5 or 6 sections that could go, so we could be adding as many as 3 more teachers over there. So FTE-wise, we just added someplace in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 people, and that's where they have to be watching. So, and it's just, if we look at this thing in its totality and how it's running out, there's some concerns. So that doesn't mean that I want them to cut 2 school psychologists because I want them to cut it. No, if you believe in the program, you believe in it. So, anyhow, anything else, or can we go to Board of Selectmen?
Next.
Board of Selectmen, Kate is going to be giving her budget presentation. We are moving along, which we started in our committee last year, but please remember, Kate is no different than the superintendent. It is not the Board of Selectmen budget until they vote on it and have their conversations. So this is Kate's budget. It will be presented 7 o'clock on Monday. I asked Kate whether or not it should be about an hour, and she said it should be less, so we should be able to make the RTM meeting. There is a slight change that, you guys don't want to hear about the Board of Selectmen budget?
I'll hear about it.
Don't leave yet.
It's on television. It's on television.
There is a request to do something different on the Board of Selectmen budget this year, and that is in the past with the buddy system, the Board of Finance and members of the RTM met with different department chairs. They're asking for all the questions to be put in during the budget timing, you know, when they're presenting where they're going to be there, or subsequently, and see if there can be answers. And only if things are not answered, then there would be potential for meetings. So we'll still work with the Board of Finance. We'll still work with Kate, and hopefully I'll speak to Kate and Jamie to see if, in the past, we've had that opportunity. Bill, you may recall that we had the opportunity where the day before they voted, we were able to give our comments and thoughts on it. And I think that's a very positive type of thing to do. And so I'll check with Kate and see if we can continue to do that, mention that to the Board of Finance. They're a little bit different than us, because that's sort of like the Board of Finance legislating what the Board of Selectmen should be doing. We're sort of like playing team with both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, so we're just giving our input on that. And it's more informal in that.
Jack, we're better than any of these guys.
You say that, I'm never
I'm more
going to say
global.
that.
They're parochial.
But no, I think that it works very well to...
We like to be global.
I think it works very well to give our input and try and attend as many meetings as possible. Everybody has the schedule, I believe. Unlike how they've done it in the past, we're all big boys and girls. I'm not assigning people to go to which meetings. Please attend the ones that you can. And any questions on that? Next is the fund. Mike, David, and Bert were there, and I'll let you guys talk about it, because I'm tired of talking tonight. David, you...
I got nothing to say.
We presented, so you guys can give your feedback of what you thought.
It was a fair summary of our work that we've done, and I think the Board of Finance welcomed the work, and it was well taken. I think where you kind of summarize things is that we have the resolutions and the next steps identified, so the videotape of the meeting should summarize exactly what was discussed and what the next steps are.
Yeah, we're trying to, we sent the resolution, so I do want to mention, because I forgot. Taylor, the feedback from your presentation was outstanding.
Yes.
You did a great job summarizing.
Thank you guys for
Chris.
helping me organize that.
And I wanted to call you out on doing an excellent job.
Yep, thanks.
Could you say you said that?
Sent it to Wayne too.
Sorry.
And so it's my understanding from speaking to Jen that some of the funds will be used in the current budget cycle. The 3 ones associated with Park and Rec will be gone. They'll close the other 3 that we had. And the Superstorm Sandy we did address that there is a need for subsidiary accounting, and also that the board should be looking at this. We also requested that all these funds be put on OpenGov. So,
Equally important was the changes they're going to make to the language, so that going forward, when a grant is made to the town for whatever purpose, they will attempt to use the fund for the purpose that was originally stated, but, if there are excess funds left over after completion, they'll be returned to the town. That's one of the things that gave rise to these excess funds sitting around, was because there was such language or practice. So that should help prevent having to do this project 5 years from now.
right, and it should also prevent having about $50,000 extra in the bicentennial fund, which we will never be able to use because you only have one bicentennial.
And David, and Jack, and Michael did a hard job. It's not only
Tammy
about the
worked on it
money.
as well.
We're supposed to be the ombudsman of the taxpayer.
Yes.
Yep.
So we can't have it that monies are sitting in some account for 10 years and people have forgotten by that time what they're for. If they're active, as we found some of them to be active, wonderful. If they're not active, let's, straighten this out. And I think the RTM is the best, it's a good role for the RTM FNB, because the RTM takes that interest in the taxpayer. And so I think I compliment you, Jack, that this was done. And it's a lot of little work. It's a lot of little work.
It was, we supplied some resource that the town, because it is tight, doesn't have. So, and we have a rather diverse, capable group of individuals sitting around this table, and those that aren't here. Martha had to miss because she's on the building committee for Pear Tree, which is where she's at. So from that perspective, we can provide a resource to help people move some things that was consistent with what the Board of Finances was doing. So this was in conjunction with the Board of Finance. It wasn't just F&B going out on its own.
Yeah.
It was done.
And just looking at my notes, I think you also, the point was made in the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, and in our comments, that there were a number of funds, some of them are active, where there should be further consideration, either by the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, or the Board of Education. There are a few funds, all three should talk. And there are a few funds where maybe it's just a Board of Finance follow-up. And I think that was, for the record, that was a suggestion made, so. Not just part of cleaning up.
I actually covered that with Wayne, because there was a
Yeah.
philosophy of how we allocated who needed to prove. My hope is that the resolution that needs to go before the Board of Selectmen can be done, and the other two that need to go between the Board of Finance and the RTM can be done next month. So that would be a significant cleanup of that, and we'd be able to move forward. Next is minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So did everybody look at the minutes? Is there a change, Stacy?
No, I want to motion Mike's beautiful minutes.
Mike's beautiful minutes. We should take one at a time.
Oh, okay.
So, no, I have them here somewhere. Mike, do you want to tell me what the dates of our minutes are that we're reviewing?
It's just a moment, please.
One is December
10th.
10th?
The other one would be, let me see here.
Is there a chance I'm forgetting these?
I got one.
You got it.
You want me to read one, please?
Yeah, that would be great, because I really don't.
Okay, so do I have a motion
I got
to
it.
December 10th? Stacy.
Motion, I got them. Yeah, I did read them.
Who seconds?
I did.
Tammy. I got her this time. I was waiting for you to raise your hand. I was staring. All right, any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor, except Barry. You have to have been there. Raise your hand.
been a member of the
Anybody
committee.
who wasn't there, yeah, I know. I'm assuming is abstaining. So, Mike, I'm sure you can handle that.
Yeah.
Next is January
14th.
14th, exactly.
Do I have somebody to move that? Oh, once again, Stacy. Lisa. We can be equal seconder here. Any discussion? All in favor? Anybody who wasn't there? You're abstaining? Seeing no further discussion, happy budgeting. I do have a motion to adjourn this meeting. I'll take Taylor's first.
Mike,
All in favor?
the minutes last.
Who was second?
I only have two people voting in favor of abstaining.
This is why we do the minutes.